Hello everybody. Well, I'm pretty excited. We're revisiting a video that I did a long time ago, which is the Rasp Tomahawk. And I haven't done one of these in forever. I've had a couple folks ask me about it, and yeah. So now in our shop, a lot of the videos you see us doing, we use a gas forge. And gas forge is great for 80% of the stuff in the shop. But when you're doing forge welding or you're doing architectural metal, you've just got to have the power and, quite frankly, the space that a solid fuel forge allows you. So what's happening here is that this is a well-used Horf hoof rasp. And what I'm doing is I'm trimming it down to the size of stock that I want. Now, on the end of a rasp, it's kind of got a rounded edge, and it's a pain in the butt to kind of get it to blend in. So I'm just cutting everything square. The first thing that we're going to need to do is we're going to need to make what we call the bow tie. Since this is a folded tomahawk or a wrap tomahawk, we're going to hammer in the middle of this piece and make it with just a dip in the middle. Depending on the style of axe, you can make the dip from both sides, but since this is a flat top tomahawk, we're just going to do it to one side. So you'll have a flat spine and then a beveled belly. Now, I'm going to tell you something. Doing this stuff, it's about 1/4 of an inch thick by about 1 3/4, maybe 2 inches wide. A lot of people kind of look at steel and they don't realize just how much work there is in moving that amount of material. Back in the day in the blacksmith shop, you would have the smith, and then you would have like 6 or 7 young dudes with sledgehammers, because the work of a lot of this stuff came from sledges, not necessarily the hand hammer itself. As I always say, when metal came from the ironmongers, it came in 3 sizes: small, medium, and oh my God. And you had to reduce this larger metal to something that was usable. And it also affects like the style of the work that we do, because you can do a lot more if you start with more material, but it's a lot more work. Whereas today we usually buy stock that's very close to what we're working on. Anyway, so what's happening here is I've got this bad boy wrapped, and I'm trying to make sure that everything's nice and even. Just making, just a little bit of housekeeping there, make sure she's as straight as possible. And now I need to open that front up a little bit. Now this is a little different from making a tomahawk or an axe out of a solid bar. And it's always a little bit of a pain to get the steel insert to stick. So we're going to heat this piece up, and then I have a small piece of 5160. Which is basically spring steel material. This is like basically leaf spring from under a truck. And that's going to be my bit, or the actual cutting edge of the rasp. Here I've got a very cool borax shaker, custom made in fact, and I am now fluxing this. Now there's a lot of like really inane debates that go on the internet. I'm sure you're surprised. But yes, you can make good forge welds without flux, but flux is basically good housekeeping. It dissolves the oxides that exist on the top of the metal and keeps new ones from forming. So yeah, it can be done. You can forge weld without flux, but the question is, why would you? So this is the steel bit. What I have done to kind of make this a little bit easier for the forge weld to compress, I have tapered one side. This will be the side that will go in between the 2 pieces of the tomahawk here. Now, this was a pain in the butt. I got the piece in, and I was trying to get it to squeeze down, and that joker just was not cooperating. Yeah, it was a pain. And actually, when I did get this thing to stick, when I did get it to forge weld, it wasn't exactly square. You can see me fighting it right here. I was, the camera's going, I'm trying to look professional, and then this crap. I'm like, you son of a gun. Yeah. So you'll feel my pain when it comes to this end of it. So Eventually, I just got the whole thing hot enough, crammed it in there, and it gave it a good tap, and it managed to stick, even though it wasn't straight. And at that point, I'm like, screw it. Let's get this done. It's not going to matter anyway. Which, yeah, that's the thought process of great blacksmiths, I suppose. Forge welding heat comes out. Remember that high carbon forge welds at a lower temperature than mild steel. So you have to be a little careful because you can burn that high carbon strip. I'll usually come through and do a light weld to start with. This is just to kind of get everything to stick. And then I will do gradually a higher and higher heat until I'm up to full forge welding temperature. And then we're popping everything together. Now, one of the wild things that I didn't know about making hatchets and tomahawks is that, in my mind, there's no waste, right? That everything fits, that everything is hammered into perfect shape, and that's just not how it was. What happens is sometimes you add material and then you use the hardy tool to clip it. A lot of this stuff was chiseled. So in something like this, I'm going to be beating the poo-poo out of it. I'm going to have a top piece and a bottom piece of that high carbon bit sticking out. It's going to look terrible. But what do? You don't try to hammer it back in to reincorporate it and fold it and risk a cold shut. You just cut it off. That's all you have to do. Now that's our full forge welding heat. That should be sealing everything up, and that will also allow me to start closing up that eye just a little bit. Again, just some straightening, just making sure everything is lined up. Now, again, when doing this type of particular work, it helps to have dedicated tongs. And I just have a pair of offset tongs here or bit tongs, and it's a little bit of a fight to do this the right way. An anvil block helps tremendously, especially when you're trying to weld towards the eye. Now, if you've ever done one of these, you know that one of the biggest problems is like when you're trying to, you weld it up and then you cram it over the horn to try to open that eye up to take the handle. Because it stresses the weld. It actually usually breaks it open. So it took me a while to figure out that the way that you solve this is actually going to the vise. But I'll show you that here in just a moment. What's going to happen now is now that we've got everything trimmed and looking good, now I need to spread the metal on the end of this piece. And again, this takes a lot of time. And boy, let me tell you what, it's been about a month and a half since I did my last big show at Perry. And so my arms are starting to lax a little bit. But man, when I got into this, right about here, when I'm trying to spread that metal and I'm hitting all that flat stuff, my arms are just screaming at this point. You've got to be in kind of good shape to make a lot of these things consistently. So now watch this. Notice me put this in the vise. It locks in. It keeps that weld from splitting. And now you drive in the drift. This is like the key to making a good-looking eye with a wrapped tomahawk. When I first started this, I just thought that the weld was supposed to be so good that it would just be perfect no matter how many times I rammed a drift down in there. That is clearly not how reality works. So when you are doing a wrapped tomahawk or a wrapped axe, locking that front end into the vise is really how you're going to make sure that the eye is not only centered, but doesn't split that weld or open it up. And if you're really good, if you're really on top of things, what you'll do is you'll cheat a little bit and you'll actually come inside that eye and drop a little bit of MIG weld in there to seal everything up. Like I said, a little cheating in that situation goes a long way. Now, this particular drift, this is one of the few drifts that I own that's actually is off the shelf. This is called a Tomahawk drift. It has a very particular taper because when you make Tomahawks, they are designed to have replaceable handles. And so there's a very steep drift, and you just do it from one side. So tippy tappy, tippy tappy. I should have a nice taper hole at this point. And there we go, guys. I want to tell you how much I appreciate you watching this series. We'll be back with part 2 next week. Thank you guys so very much.